Well, Bernard, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate it. You mentioned a little bit earlier that um, being out in the world as a composer beyond your music is maybe something that you don't do a ton of. You prefer the sort of the cloister of the writing room, and so we doubly appreciate you taking the time to talk. Do you enjoy talking about your music?
Uh, yes, I do. Um, as you well know, I'm married to a very capable composer, so we do a lot of talking about music of one sort or another. Um, it's as I've gotten older that I've sort of withdrawn. I mean, when I was younger, I was always performing and playing, conducting here and yon, forming ensembles and doing whatever was possible to, for the whole enterprise of music of our own time. But as I've gotten older, I love to spend the time in my studio, and time is short for me now. I'm not that young, youthful anymore, but probably I'm youthful, but not by numbers. I'll be 86 next week, so I have a lot that I still want to do. And so I don't waste my time doing frivolous things outside.
Certainly.
Yeah.
What about sort of the pre-concert talk or speaking to people after the show? Do you enjoy having that
I've
feedback?
done that many times. I mean, I was 7 years composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra. I've been composer in residence with other orchestras in Europe and over here. So that comes with the territory. And I think if one can phrase it in such a way that there is something that the listener can engage with and that leads them to the music, then I think it's worthwhile. I don't. I've never thought that one can go and give a talk and persuade somebody that they have to like this piece of music at all, but simply to say, if you open your ears and you open your mind and you open your heart, and just do what John Lennon called a magical mystery tour, uh, the odds are that you'll get something from it. Not everything, because music is too complex and and too subtle to understand everything that on first hearing, assuming we're listening to a piece for the first time. If we're listening to a repertoire, that's been around a couple of 100 years or so, that's a different matter altogether. But with new pieces, I think one could just encourage them to put away their anxieties about the fact that they don't know it. And it does make people very anxious sometimes, and often the music doesn't help. It even makes them more anxious when they've heard it because they don't know quite how to listen. But I'm reticent about telling people how to listen. Just listen, just listen, and let it take you where it will. And if it's music of real quality and even profound quality, it will have its impact.
I feel like part of the reason that I'm asking you the question is that the way my brain works, I tend to think of my favorite composers in terms of one thing that they do extraordinarily, sort of above all else. And if I had to say that, my narrative that I would write about you is that I never listen to your music and am passive about it. It's music that to me demands my attention. It demands my buy-in. It doesn't allow me to sit back in any way. Does that resonate for you at all?
Yes, I think that's the way to listen. I mean, when we talk about, there's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is an input, but not a passive. It's a rather lazy way of relating to music. But listening, actually listening, and even if one gets lost, but then seizes on something else that the mind, this computer up here says, oh, I thought I heard that a moment or two ago. Now it's a little bit different. You're already engaged in a process, which is what music is about. I mean, it's about itself in that sense. It has a process that leads from the first sound to the very last. And when the composer really knows what he or she is master of, then that's a wonderful journey to take as a listener, I think.
Do you apply that same acuity of listening to a piece, sort of regardless of whether on first flush you feel like it's engaging you or not? Like, do you bring that same level of attention to every
I
listening
try.
experience?
I do. I really do try, and I can't tell you how many times I've been rewarded for being stubborn enough to go back and listen again and listen again and listen again to something that did not grab my attention the first time around, or even the second time around, but over a period of listening, its qualities come to the surface, and much depends, of course, on the quality of the performance, the circumstances under which one's listening to it. Yeah, and I think it's also, for me, part of the composition process. I mean, I very often say to myself, when I'm crossing something out or throwing that, now, if I don't want to listen to that, there's no reason why anybody else should have to. Okay, so I'm very meticulous about how the music unfolds itself for somebody to listen to.
So in a way, you're taking care of the listener within the music rather than setting them up, say in a pre-concert talk or something like that. This is how you should listen to it.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that I'm only going to present you with something that I think deserves at least the chance of your attention in that way.
Yeah, it's what you said a moment or two ago, that if the music grabs you at the beginning, and I think it's very important that, from the first note, something is striking about it, you remember the chance. It's a very complex set of relationships between a listener, whoever that is, and a piece of music, whatever piece of music it is. Even pieces of music that we've known for all our lives, can almost write them out from memory, from the repertoire. Why is it that sometimes the most beloved of pieces, you go and you listen and come away disappointed? Is that just that the players are not on that night, or is it that the listener is not on that night and not giving it the... So it's very, very hard to describe.
Do you think, like, I find myself thinking a lot about, I feel like my ideas about music have become less hierarchical and more about what I need to hear on a given day. So there's a day that, because of something that's happened at home or something that's happened at work or an encounter I had on the street, that I want to hear a kind of music that lights me up in this specific way. Does that change at all? When we talk about like that's a very noble endeavor to try to go to a concert and listen with the same amount of detail and attention to everything, regardless of whether or not it's hitting you viscerally that particular day, right?
Yeah. Yes, but remember that you're a musician since you're a child.
That's true.
Now, most people go to concerts mainly as a diversion from all of the things that has been happened, and they want to go and relax, and they basically want something familiar, preferably, and once in a while, maybe a new piece will strike them, and they'll be generous about it and say, well, that wasn't bad, and we'll come back and listen to it again. But I think for us, who have listened to music since we were just every single day for hours on end, it's a very different experience and different process.
Have you written a piece of music that was expressly for the purpose of putting someone in a state of peace or calm, or...
Not deliberately, because I don't know who that person is.
Sure.
And it could have completely the opposite effect. So when people say, do you write for an audience? I write for myself, because if I'm not honest and digging deep in myself, I'm cheating myself, I'm cheating the musicians, I'm cheating the audience. So I can only express as clearly, and this involves all the technical aspects of notation and precision of calculation and so on, and shaping and nuance, uh, that hopefully adds up to an experience for a listener who maybe didn't come with any enthusiasm. The worst thing any listener can do is go to a concert in an antagonistic frame of mind. If you're antagonistic to a piece of music before it starts, your chances of it getting its message over are limited.
Do you think antagonism is worse than apathy?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say.
In terms of the frame of mind that you
yes,
enter the concert space for.
I mean, apathy probably can let its guard down once in a while,
Sure.
but if you know, I've sat and I've heard people, and somebody said to their neighbor that I'm not looking forward to this because I heard a piece by this guy at the Philharmonic meeting in New York, and he said I was suicidal after it.
That's a
I
strong
felt
statement.
like turning around and saying, "I'm sorry you didn't pursue your," but you know.
Yeah, it strikes me as a bit of overstatement, but people do, certainly, especially in a symphony situation, tend to be very cavalier about their feelings about these things. But, oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Just to finish on the subject, I mean, I can't know who an audience is. I mean, and I was answering that by saying that one can only be honest to one's own inner promptings. But I think there is a way of composing which actually involves the process of listening. That if a music is so fractured, and one of the problems of the 20th century in general and now into the 21st century is that so much of it doesn't have a linear unfolding that allows the listener to be taken with their ears through a sonic experience. It's hard for people to follow, and that's why a lot of very good music has been neglected in the 20th century. I mean, neglected in terms of becoming regular parts of the repertoire programming.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean then that the way that you approach a piece of music is that there's some time given to sort of drawing the listener into the experience of that piece?
Yes, it's to do with many things, Doyle, of timing, of the speed of unfolding of ideas. I mean, often when I was teaching, you know, I would look at a student's work, and the first page would be absolutely blank, full of notes. So
Okay.
change over. The next is exactly the same and the same, non-stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, just to put the student on the spot, I would say, "Can you sing me part of that?" Is this? Well, I don't sing. I can't sing that. Well, go to the piano and play. Well, I'm not a pianist. Well, what are you? I'm a composer. Well, that's not a good enough answer for me. I mean, if you're not a musician, don't be a composer, because the odds are you're going to just produce drivel, and we have a lot of it. I'm sorry, but we have a lot of it.
Sure. Which
is very different from music that's complex and full of
purposeful, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can remember very, very clearly when one Bartok quartet would send people through the scrutiny for the exit. Now they play all six in one concert and standing ovation. Nobody moves. Why? Because of the quality of the thought. Sure, at the time it was, it's very straight, and it's also very, very honest music. It comes over with a passion. And when you play Bartok's music, I mean, if you don't play it with passionate, missing something too.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's
So what is the, when you talk about this sort of the way that you're careful about what you actually put on stage, can you give me an idea of you in your studio? What is sort of the largest chunk of something you've just all of a sudden realized, like, this isn't it, gone? Are we talking about a matter of measures? Are we talking about a movement of something? Like, because that has to be a process of realization on some level.
Yeah, I think it's more moment to moment than it is. Although when a movement's finished or a piece is finished, again one withdraws and has a different perspective, and there's certain things you say, well, that doesn't quite seal what I intended at that moment. So you have to go back and tinker with it until you find the right solution. But I when I was a student with Dalla Piccola in Italy, he turned to me one afternoon in Italian. He said, we're supposed to be living in a contrapuntal era of 12-tone music and so on. He said, but I still think that harmony is the most fundamental element that we have to take care of. And I totally believe that. I mean, you can weave your lines, but if vertically it doesn't make sense, leading tone-wise, it's very, very hard. And some of the music that I find the most unacceptable now is one in which there's no melody anymore. There's only a line of noise.
Okay.
And I know how that comes about and why it comes about historically. But for anyone who just loves music and wants to listen to it for whatever kind of pleasure that they derive from it, it's a complete shutout. There's no way. I can mention names, but we don't have to go into.
Because we do have to speak kind of generically about it. But if the narrative is somewhat that between the world wars we go into a period of existential chaos, is there it's hard to talk about these things as one big block because certain composers are better than others, of course. But is there a place for that feeling of dread or that feeling of being completely unmoored from reality or anything like that in that noise music for you? Does it inhabit a place?
It's a question that's been asked certainly over and over during my lifetime, and certainly from the time that I was, out of my teenage years.
Sure.
And certain assumptions were made that were parallel to the visual arts, particularly.
Right, of course.
And let's just take abstract expressionism for a moment. That you can do with music what painters did on a canvas. And at a certain moment, you have to ask yourself, is that a fair equivalence? Because music doesn't behave like a still painting. I mean, I can sit here and look at that and do every day and find new things in it. But if I'm listening to a piece of music, it's gone. And I'm not sure that it's. I'm sure for myself, but I'm not sure that in general it's possible to make these correspondences between one art form and another to that extent, because music depends on. So, and if you accept, as I do, the harmonic basis of compositions, the composer that's most influential in everything that I do and think about musically is Debussy. Now I came through the 12-tone school and all the
Sure.
rest of it and did all of that. And gradually worked my way out of it because I found it unsatisfactory for me. And I'm not in the business of legislating for other composers. They do what they have to do. And that's what makes for a very rich musical culture. If we all wrote the same music, it would be pretty terrible. But take Debussy, for example. For me, he's always been the father of new music, much more, which is not to diminish the second Viennese school's influence, and I loved much of that. I mean, I've loved it since I was a teenager. But Debussy is able to have, in all of his music, a succession of musical, let's say, modules or which don't necessarily follow each other logically. They suddenly, I mean, he'll begin a piece this way, and then suddenly there'll be something that seems to come out of left field, and then he'll find his way back to the original idea, but now transformed, and then he'll come back to the piece that came out of left field, and now it sounds as though it comes out of right field. And what happens is that when the piece is finished, the totality is so impressive, so convincing, and that's the way I work. That's my ideal is to be able to go through a labyrinth of possibilities of seemingly unexpected and unanticipated moments, but which occur in such a way and a number of times in context that eventually the totality adds up. Yeah. And that doesn't matter whether it's a 5-minute piece or whether it's a 50-minute piece. The same principle affects everything I do. Yeah.
Well, beautifully put. You know, there's a a question that I've found myself wanting to ask you ever since we first got the chance to play for you in Spektral, and that's that your scores are very exacting without being overbearing in terms of the amount of information that's given, let's say timbrally or otherwise. And you know, working with as many composers as we do, there are of course people that talk about things in very abstract terms. Play this like a sunset is my, you know, like it's the kind of the age-old conductor joke, right? But I find that when working with you, there is to my mind anyway, a pretty profound emotional content in the music. And yet when we're workshopping, you tend to be a little bit more, I don't know what the way to put it is, matter of fact, or simply, well, I did write forte here and I was thinking of, you know, this and the way that it relates to that, but it generally doesn't fall into sort of like a painterly language. And I was wondering, I know that you've spoken before about you know, the influence of your father and somebody that was quite a composed person. Sorry, bad choice of words, I guess. But somebody that was did a lot but was quite quiet about it. And I was wondering, is that sort of an inheritance of yours, or something that you emulate, or do these things even come into the same territory for you?
You know, Doyle, that's one of the imponderable. What makes us what we are, part of it's genetic, from, you know, family inheritances and so on. Part of it's from discipline training. Part of it's from exposing oneself to a wide range of artistic expression, whether it's in literature, in poetry, in architecture, in music, and so on. I think the notation system, particularly the tonal notation system, is so precise and so beautiful that why not engage it to your purposes to the maximum? That's basically idea in that respect. Now, I've not used key systems for 40, 50 years now.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean to say my music's not tonal. It's very tonal. Even the most wild years of my life. There's a recording by Ursula Oppens of my Memo 5 for piano, which, I mean, covers the damn keyboard non-stop from top to bottom. And when she was learning it, I went over to work with her. And I said, is this difficult to learn, Ursula? She said, no, it's straightforward. She said, the way you've composed it, it's absolutely, you can't mistake where it's going and where you want it to go. And when you get there, you know exactly what it's going to do after that. And she said, I can memorize it. And yeah. So, I mean, that's a wonderful tribute, taken as a compliment. But it's also a description of the way in which I think about my music when I'm composing. And you know, going back to the rather simplistic way of thinking about early 12-tone music and so on, and Schoenberg saying, you know, repetition is out until you've done. Well, a lot of great composers were wrong a number of times when they made public statements of that kind. Boulez, who was a wonderful friend and a marvelous musician in so many ways, you know, made statements about this and that and the other, which were completely off the mark. I mean, that's okay.
Or they were absolutist in some way.
Yes. I mean, the reason was because historically they were placed in a situation where they were trying to deny something that had exerted its influence for 2 centuries and had ended up in tragedy in terms of social matters. And a number of my avant-garde friends in Europe, in conversation, have often said, you know, I've said to them, why are you doing this? We were all doing that in the early 1960s. You don't seem to have moved very far. And they said, oh, well, of course, you know, it's sold out to America and all of that. So
the ultimate insult. You've become an American.
Yeah, right. Come to America, yeah. No, I mean, I left because I was not prepared to be a clone in any one of the domains that were headed by actual friends of mine. Stockhausen was a friend, Boulez was a friend, Berio was almost like a brother. I mean, I loved Luciano Berio.
Some of my favorite music.
And what a musician, what a composer.
Yeah.
You know, but I wasn't prepared to simply subscribe to a dogma that seemed to be. And Luciano actually was less dogmatic than most.
He did his own thing.
Yes, yeah. And that's where that's been. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, is it reading too much into things? Let me put it a different way. So you have 10-string quartets that play, you know, an Opus 95 Beethoven. The scores are, at this point, relatively well-researched, and we pretty much assume this is what Beethoven meant, and we'll get 10 different interpretations. Are you talking about something in your own music where the notation is as exact as it can be and also makes space for the way that these 4 musicians might bring their own experience to it?
It has to be. Yeah. You limit the degree of ambiguity that will allow for stupidity to happen or misreadings and so on. But if it's as clear an articulated message as you can make given the notation system, then that invites the musicians, come now, make it, you know, take it off the shelf, let it come now into something. And God forbid that we would have just, in the late 20th century and now into the 21st century, my fear is that the social nature of music making, where people come together voluntarily on a bitterly cold February night to listen to some piece of music that maybe they never heard before, and the players have worked their fingers to the bone to get it. Just, that's something special, and if it only ends up in people being cranky about it and saying, well, first of all, as some players do, you belong to a group that's very open-minded about techniques and so on, and willing to at least prove that it can't be played.
Or die trying.
Yeah. But I was back to the students again. Do you really love music, or do you love the idea of being a composer? Because they can be very, very different things.
When you talk about that sacrifice, do you mean something beyond the obvious financial or stability sacrifices that we make? Well, what is an example of that kind of sacrifice?
Well,
for you?
How many? Not everybody, but I'm guilty. How many marriages can you wreck? Yeah, I'm married now for the third time. What happens to your children when they're small and they come knocking on the studio door? Daddy, can we play? Can we come and play? No, go away, I'm working. I mean, it's an awful thing, but you have to deal with that, and
that's tough. It's the biggest challenge in some ways.
Yeah. And you belong to an ensemble that it's not really a joke, but it's always said with a smile. The string quartet is the only ensemble that ever rehearses.
You're not wrong.
You damn well have to.
Yeah. There's no hiding.
No, there's absolutely no. Whether it's Haydn or Haydn,
If it's not too personal to ask, and please tell me if it is, but as you turn 86, do the sacrifices feel like they were the right decisions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we regret. I don't see my great-grandchildren all the time. I'd love to. We Skype non-stop.
Right.
But that's not the same.
Right.
But by this age, I've gotten used to it.
There is time that's necessary to be able to do what you do, especially given the amount of music that you continue to write.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you something, if I could. In some ways, those sacrifices that we make, and I feel like in some ways, are sort of find their way into ideas of mentorship and helping out the younger generation, hopefully make a few less mistakes than you made yourself coming up and things like that. And you've spoken very eloquently about the role that Michael Tippett played in your life early on. And I was just wondering, so in terms of his advocacy for you, or is it his desire to be an advocate for you, right?
Yeah.
Both personally and otherwise. But can you tell me how that idea of mentorship has played out in your life in terms of what you hope to pass along, or the ways that you've helped those that come up behind you?
And I think in general, although there are obviously exceptions, there's a difference between the United States, where this kind of relationship between mentor and student was in Europe. Once Boulez had accepted to conduct a piece of mine in Darmstadt 60 odd years ago now, then because he thought it was worth his while to do that, he conducted and commissioned and then went on and on and on. So what better mentorship can you have than that? The physical, the actual practical support.
It's tangible.
Yeah. Berio was very, very. I mean, we were very close in so many ways. They the two of them took my music to Universal Edition in Vienna, and said, "You have to publish this young man." I mean, I didn't even know they were doing it at the time. It was 1962, 63. Over here, it doesn't seem to work with that same degree of generosity. I don't know how you find it among, coaching young players, but I think among composers, I don't know many that go out of their way to help their students.
Sometimes I find that the questions that are asked are maybe not the right questions. So, if you come across a young ensemble, they might say, "How do we get management?" You say, "Pump the brakes, kid."
No,
like this is not the question to be asking right now. The question to be asking
if they ask me, I'm asking the wrong person. I've never had one, and
fly solo, lone wolf.
It's see, when I first went then to meet the people in Universal Edition in Vienna, we're talking about Alfred Kalmus. The name rings a bell, I'm sure. Alfred Schley. They were friends with Schoenberg, Berg, Mahler, Stravinsky. They had them to dinner on Sunday, the group of Viennese Jews who had a passion for music. And they ran the company that way until finally they were gone, and the next generation were not as sympathetic, shall I say, as they were. And so it deteriorated in many ways. But when you think what their catalogue was like, they had the principle that, okay, they captured the music of the first generation of new music, and then the people who came up through afterwards, they wanted to sign them up immediately. So, and they signed up Boulez and Berio and Ligeti and Penderecki and on and on and on. They were all Universal Edition composers. And I was the next generation. So Harry Birtwistle, myself, people in Europe and so on. So there was a kind of lifelong commitment to you. That's not so easy over here.
Right.
And often the kids ask me, how can I get something published? I say, well, and if it's something that I think is really worthwhile, I will take it to I'm with Schott,
right?
And say, please have a look at this. I don't do it very often, but it's not common to do that. And publishing is such a mess anyway. In general, it's not. It's not as it used to be years ago.
Indeed. Well, so the reason that we're talking today is that we have a concert coming up later this season where we're very happy to be debuting a brand new shorter piece by you. We fell in love with your second string quartet.
Part of a piece so far.
What a part of a piece, yeah.
Because I intend. I mean, I have been not distracted but diverted from it for a little while because I had a couple of orchestra pieces to do.
Just a couple of small things.
I will come back to it and make it into a larger, maybe 3 movement.
Well, I'm not here to check in on you.
No.
No. But the reason that I bring it up is that we were approached by the Chicago Composers Consortium for this idea of a way to celebrate you being a Chicago composer and side of one of the if you don't mind me saying so, elder statesmen of composition in Chicago. And I wonder, for somebody that is, let's say, relatively private or not making a point to just sort of be broadcasting yourself in the world beyond your music, I'm wondering what that feels like to have this wonderful collection of composers writing essentially tributes to a piece that you're writing for us.
Well, I think the idea of Casey Ginter, who is one of the, I think, 10 members of that group. I mean, they've played my music over the years at various times, along with their own compositions and so on. And I have a lot of respect for them. They don't think in worldwide terms. They think in Chicago.
Yeah.
They're a group of friends who love to to compose pieces of music in very, very different styles. And when Casey came up with the idea that it might be interesting if I started a piece and then they respond to it. Now, how that will turn out, I have no idea.
We'll all find out.
We'll all find out. But I admire their what's the word I'm looking for? Their integrity as a group. They've kept going for 20 years, putting on concerts. And, so I thought, well, that's a great idea. Why wouldn't they have this opportunity to play with a really first-rate ensemble, which is very often not the case in their case. They put a few pieces together, hither and yon, and it's not sometimes just as that they would like it. But for them all to write for your quartet, I mean, it's a terrific opportunity for them.
I'm going to push you back towards the original question a little bit, though, which is that, of course, at a certain age, there are these sort of milestone birthday years that are celebrated and things like that. And I'm wondering if you'd be comfortable sharing what that feels like when all of a sudden there's a lot of attention back on you. In this case, it's a smaller concert, but of course, your 80th birthday, there were many big shows that happened as a result of that. Is that something that you welcome at this stage of your career?
Yeah, I'd be lying to you if I said I don't want anybody to be playing my music.
Of course.
No. It's gratifying. What is gratifying is when you're young as a composer, you're very vulnerable in many ways, even though you have a lot of determination and probably more determination than imagination at that point. But as the years go by, speaking personally, you build up a sense of who you are, and I know best who I am when I'm in my studio working, creating music, or rehearsing with musicians, so that together we're discovering what's the best way to realize the whole idea. What's gratifying now is that pieces that I wrote 50 years ago are being played. Now, does that mean they've entered the repertoire in the larger sense? I don't know. How much more I can't worry about it. But it is nice that. In fact, somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, I just heard your second quartet." I said, "Where?" And he'd heard it in Paris a few weeks ago. He said, "It's beautiful." So, that's nice.
It is. It's a beautiful piece.
So anyway,
I suppose part of the reason that I'm asking the question is a bit selfish, which is that Spektral is coming up on its 10th anniversary, which of course for us at our age feels like a big milestone.
Yeah.
Anything lasting 10 years in music feels like a milestone on some level. But what's funny is that you start as this scrappy upstart DIY, just clawing for anything you can get in the early years, and then you get to such a short amount of time, but what feels like a large amount of time of a 10-year mark, and then you realize other people look up to you as like, oh, you've kind of figured it out. Yeah. You've gotten some concerts that we would love to have, or you're being able to work with certain composers that we probably can't approach yet, or things like that. And you realize all of a sudden, like wait, or you want to say like, wait a second, like I'm still figuring this out. Like I still feel immense self-consciousness in certain situations, or there are certain concerts that I'm petrified of, or there's those moments of terror, but like there is a little bit of confidence that's built in terms of like, I know who we are. So I guess my question for you, my very long-winded question for you, is that there's the surety of who you are in the studio, but do some of these same anxieties about what it means to put your music out in the world still exist when you're writing it?
Oh, sure. I mean, technically, I can do anything I want. I mean, I'm not boasting. I just do have a command of harmony, counterpoint, orchestration, whatever, all that stuff. Most of which I never studied. I only studied scores, music. But the reason you as an ensemble now have reached that point is because you've worked at it. I mean, you work and work and work. And that gives rise to all of the other things that we talked about earlier, that the sacrifices that you have to make in order to do that.
Well, Bernard, thank you so much for making the time. I could talk to you for hours, but this has really been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.